The conference room lights hummed above the glass table. Mark Talbot stood at the front, his voice smooth and confident as he clicked through the presentation. My presentation. The slides I'd spent months perfecting flashed across the screen, one after another. This partnership with Apex Systems was a complex negotiation, Mark said, gesturing at my numbers, my graphs, my carefully crafted pricing structure. I led the outreach, structured the deal, and closed it last night. The executives applauded. The CEO stood and shook Mark's hand, calling him the dealmaker of the year. I sat frozen in my chair, watching my 6 months of work being claimed by someone else. My name appeared nowhere in the presentation. Every document had been scrubbed clean. Mark glanced at me across the table and smirked. That tiny smile said everything. He knew exactly what he'd done, and he knew I couldn't do anything about it. My hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. Calculated. Surgical. After the meeting ended, Mark approached me in the hallway. He placed his hand on my shoulder with fake sympathy. "Don't worry, Evan," he said quietly, making sure no one else could hear. "You'll get your shot one day. Just keep doing what you're doing." I wanted to shout. I wanted to grab him by his expensive tie and demand answers. But I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing. I just stood there, watching him walk away toward the executive elevator, basking in praise for my work. That's when something changed inside me. Not rage, not yet. Something colder. Something more dangerous. The kind of anger that doesn't make you yell or throw things. The kind that makes you think. That makes you plan. That makes you wait for the perfect moment to strike back. Mark thought my silence meant defeat. He had no idea it was the opposite. That moment in the hallway changed everything. I realized I'd been cut out of a $13 million deal I'd built from scratch. The deal that was supposed to make my career had just made his instead. But Mark made one critical mistake. He assumed I would just accept it. He assumed I'd crawl back to my desk and keep working like nothing happened. He was wrong. Because that night, I went home and started planning. Not revenge, something better. Justice. The email I would eventually send didn't just expose what he'd done. It changed the entire company overnight. It destroyed his career, restructured leadership, and gave me everything he'd tried to steal. My name is Evan Price, and this is the story of how one perfectly timed email brought down a thief and rebuilt my future. My director cut me out of a $13 million deal. I sent one email that changed the whole company overnight. I'd been with Stratus Dynamics for 6 years. 6 years of showing up early, staying late, and believing that hard work actually mattered. I started in a tiny cubicle near the bathrooms, cold calling potential clients and building relationships from nothing. I grew accounts worth millions. I never missed a deadline. I never cut corners. I did everything right because I believed in the company. More importantly, I believed in Mark Talbot. He was my director, my mentor, or so I thought. Mark was the kind of guy who remembered everyone's names, asked about your weekend, and bought drinks on Friday. He seemed genuine. He told me once, over beers after closing a deal, that he'd make sure I got promoted. "Stick with me, Evan," he'd said. "I'll take care of you." I believed every word. I shouldn't have. Because while I was busy trusting him, he was busy positioning himself to take credit for everything I built. Mark was good at what he did. Not at business development, at manipulation. He'd perfected the art of appearing supportive while quietly stealing your wins. It happened gradually, so slowly you barely noticed until it was too late. First, he'd offer to support you on important calls. Then he'd suggest small changes to your proposals. Then he'd start leading meetings with your clients. Before you knew it, his name was on everything and yours had disappeared. I'd watched it happen to others. I never thought it would happen to me. The Apex Systems deal started 8 months ago as a cold lead nobody wanted. A tech company looking to merge their operations with a consulting firm. High risk, high reward. Most people passed on it. I didn't. I spent months researching their business model, understanding their pain points, and crafting a proposal that solved their exact problems. I flew to Seattle twice on my own dime to meet their executive team. The breakthrough came in March. Apex's chief operating officer, Kyle Bradford, finally agreed to a formal presentation. I was thrilled. This was my shot. I told Mark about it during our weekly check-in, expecting congratulations. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, "This sounds big, Evan. Maybe too big to handle alone. Let me join the call for support." Support. That word should have been my warning. The first call went well. I presented, Mark occasionally chimed in with encouragement. Kyle seemed impressed with my preparation. After we hung up, Mark patted my back. "Great job. But next time, let me take the lead on pricing structure. That's my strength." I agreed. It seemed reasonable. The second call, Mark talked more than I did. By the third call, he was leading entirely. I became the assistant on my own deal. When Kyle asked questions, Mark answered before I could speak. By May, my name had vanished from all official documents. Contracts listed Mark as primary contact. Email threads excluded me entirely. When I asked Mark about it, he smiled and said, "Don't worry about administrative details, Evan. Focus on supporting the technical aspects. That's where you shine." Supporting my own deal. I should have fought back then. I should have gone to our vice president or human resources. But I didn't want to seem difficult. I didn't want to rock the boat. I told myself that when the deal closed, everyone would know I'd done the work. My contributions would speak for themselves. I was naive. I didn't understand that in corporate America, credit doesn't go to who deserves it. Credit goes to whose name is on the paperwork. When Apex finally signed the contracts in late June, Mark was listed as lead negotiator. I wasn't mentioned anywhere. The morning of the presentation, I arrived early. I wanted to review the slides one last time, make sure everything was perfect. When I opened the file, my stomach dropped. Every slide I'd created had been reformatted. My name, which I'd included in the contributor section, had been removed. Even the photos from my Seattle trip, showing me meeting with Kyle's team, had been cropped to remove me from the frame. I sat there staring at my computer screen, hands shaking. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate erasure. Mark had systematically removed every trace of my involvement. I wanted to confront him immediately. I wanted to march into his office and demand answers. But something stopped me. A voice in my head said, "Wait. Watch. Gather evidence." So I took screenshots of everything. The original files with my name. The modified versions without it. Time stamps. Edit histories. Everything. The presentation itself was torture. Watching Mark stand up there, using my words, presenting my analysis, claiming my relationships as his own. The executives ate it up. They praised his initiative, his dedication, his strategic thinking. When the CEO asked how he'd managed to close such a difficult client, Mark didn't hesitate. "Persistence," he said, looking directly at me. "And knowing when to take charge." Kyle from Apex had joined via video call. At one point, he mentioned something I discussed with him privately about implementation timelines. Mark smoothly redirected the conversation without acknowledging that I'd been the one who'd built that relationship. After the presentation, during the question period, one executive asked, "Did anyone else contribute to this project?" Mark paused for exactly 2 seconds. My team provided excellent support, he said vaguely. But the strategic direction was mine. My team. Support. Those words burned like acid. 2 weeks after the presentation, the internal newsletter came out. Front page headline, Director Talbot lands record-breaking deal. The article described Mark's tireless efforts and innovative approach. There was even a photo from the Apex signing ceremony. A photo taken in Seattle, where I'd flown to finalize details. I was originally in that photo, standing next to Kyle. But the published version was cropped just enough to cut me out. I stood in the break room, staring at that newsletter, feeling something inside me shift. The anger I'd been suppressing for weeks suddenly crystallized into cold determination. Mark hadn't just stolen credit. He'd tried to erase me completely from history. That's when I knew I wouldn't let this go. I wouldn't complain to human resources or whine to coworkers. I would build an airtight case, document everything, and bring him down properly. Permanently. I created a private folder on my personal laptop. Not the company server where Mark might have access. Just mine, encrypted and backed up to 3 different locations. I titled it simply, Timeline. Inside, I began organizing everything. Every email I'd ever sent about Apex. Every proposal draft with my name on it. Every calendar invite showing my meetings with Kyle. Call logs from my personal phone showing dozens of conversations. Expense reports from my Seattle trips, paid with my own credit card because the travel budget was delayed. Notes from strategy sessions where I'd outlined the entire approach. And the most damning piece of evidence, an email from Mark himself, sent in April, where he'd written, per our agreement, Evan will finalize the documentation once Apex approves the terms. That single sentence proved he knew I was leading the deal. His own words would destroy him. 3 weeks after the presentation, Mark called me into his office. He was leaning back in his leather chair, feet propped on his desk, looking completely relaxed. Evan, sit down, he said, gesturing casually. I wanted to thank you for your support on the Apex deal. Support. That word again. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral. The company really noticed your effort, Mark continued. Your attention to detail was valuable. He paused, picking up a pen and twirling it. But moving forward, I think we should keep leadership visibility tighter on major deals. You understand, right? Too many cooks in the kitchen and all that. Translation, stay in your lane. Know your place. Don't try to claim credit. I forced a smile. Of course. Whatever's best for the team. Good man, Mark said, looking pleased. That's the attitude that'll take you far. My hands were shaking under the desk. Not from fear. From restraint. Because I wanted to throw his smug attitude back in his face right then. The following month, Stratus held its annual company dinner. 200 employees packed into a hotel ballroom, celebrating the year's successes. Mark sat at the head table with the executives. I sat in the back with other senior associates. After dinner, the CEO gave awards. Dealmaker of the Year went to Mark, of course. He stood up, accepted a crystal trophy, and gave a speech. I want to thank my team, he said, his voice carrying across the room. Especially the people who make me look good. Everyone laughed. Mark's eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom. He raised his glass in a mock toast. That gesture, that arrogant little salute, sealed his fate. Because that night, I went home and pulled up the email I'd been drafting for weeks. I read through it one final time, checking every word, every attachment, every detail. It was perfect. Professional. Factual. Unemotional. And absolutely devastating. The email took me 2 full weeks to refine. I wrote 17 different drafts, each one better than the last. The key was tone. I couldn't sound angry or vindictive. I couldn't make accusations or throw around blame. I had to present facts, let the evidence speak for itself, and trust that intelligent people would draw the correct conclusions. The subject line alone took me 3 days to perfect. Too aggressive and it would be dismissed as sour grapes. Too passive and it would be ignored entirely. I finally settled on clarification on Apex Systems negotiation timeline. Professional. Neutral. Impossible to ignore. The body of the email was 3 paragraphs. Short, direct, and devastating. I explained that recent internal communications about the Apex deal contained some inaccuracies regarding project leadership and timeline. I stated that I wanted to provide clarification for record-keeping purposes. Then I attached 15 documents. Chronologically organized. Time-stamped. Indisputable. Timing was everything. I couldn't send the email randomly. It needed maximum impact, minimum chance for Mark to spin a defense before people saw the evidence. The perfect window appeared on a Thursday morning. Mark had scheduled a major executive meeting for 8:30, where he planned to present his vision for expanding the Apex partnership. He'd been bragging about it all week. I set my email to send at 8:15. Exactly 15 minutes before his meeting started. Just enough time for executives to read it before walking into that conference room. Just enough time for questions to form. Not enough time for Mark to prepare answers. I scheduled the email Wednesday night, then tried to sleep. I couldn't. I lay awake, staring at my ceiling, playing out scenarios in my head. What if they didn't believe me? What if Mark somehow talked his way out of it? What if this backfired completely? At 7:45 Thursday morning, I gave up on sleep and drove to the office. I sat at my desk at 8:14, watching the clock. My heart hammered against my ribs. 60 seconds. 45 seconds. 30 seconds. At 8:15 exactly, my email sent. I refreshed my inbox obsessively, watching for responses. Nothing for 3 minutes. Then, at 8:18, my phone started pinging. Reply from the CEO. Reply from the Vice President of Operations. Reply from Human Resources. Forward to Legal Department. By 8:32, my inbox had exploded with 15 new messages. Most were simple: "Can we discuss this?" or "Please confirm your availability for a meeting." But one, from our CEO, made my pulse race: "Come upstairs immediately." I stood up on shaky legs and headed toward the elevator. Around me, co-workers were staring at their computers with shocked expressions. The email had gone to 40 people. Word was spreading fast. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like it lasted forever. When the doors opened, the CEO's assistant was waiting. "Conference room 3, she said quietly. "They're ready for you." The conference room was packed. CEO. Vice President. Head of Human Resources. Legal Counsel. And Mark. He sat at the far end of the table, his face pale and sweaty. The confident swagger from every previous meeting had evaporated completely. The CEO gestured to an empty chair. "Evan, sit down." I sat. He slid a printed copy of my email across the table. "Mark, would you care to explain why your so-called solo deal includes a complete trail of Evan's work?" Mark's mouth opened and closed. This is taken out of context," he stammered. "Evan was part of the team. I never said I worked alone. It was collaboration." The CEO's expression hardened. "Collaboration means shared credit, Mark. Not erasing someone's name from every document while claiming their work as your own." He tapped the stack of attachments. "These emails tell a different story. A very clear story." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The head of Human Resources, Patricia Holmes, leaned forward. "Mark, we have documentation here showing Evan initiated contact with Apex in November. He conducted the first 8 meetings alone. He created all pricing proposals. He flew to Seattle twice using personal funds when company travel budget was delayed." She looked up from her notes. "Your involvement began in March, 4 months into the project. Is that accurate?" Mark's face flushed red. "I provided strategic oversight from the beginning. Evan needed guidance on how to approach a deal this size." "Then why," the CEO interrupted, "does this email from you, dated April 19th, state that Evan would finalize documentation? Why would he be finalizing anything if you were leading?" Silence. Mark had no answer. The vice president spoke next. "We've also been contacted by Kyle Bradford at Apex. He called this morning after seeing the email chain. He specifically asked to speak with Evan, saying he was the one who built their relationship. By noon, Human Resources had launched a formal investigation. By 2 in the afternoon, the legal department was involved, reviewing whether Mark's actions constituted fraud. By 5 o'clock, Mark was suspended pending investigation. He tried calling me that evening. 7 times. I didn't answer. I didn't block him either. I wanted him to know I was ignoring him deliberately." The next morning, an internal memo went out to the entire company. "Due to recent discrepancies in project representation and concerns about leadership integrity, Stratus Dynamics will be conducting a thorough review of project attribution protocols. Effective immediately, Director Mark Talbot is on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation." His name disappeared from the company directory by end of business Friday. His office was cleared out. His access badges deactivated. Just like he'd tried to erase me, the company erased him. Except this erasure was justified. Permanent. Deserved. People started treating me differently. Some stopped by my desk to whisper congratulations, calling me brave for speaking up. Others avoided me entirely, worried about being associated with corporate drama. A few colleagues from Mark's inner circle gave me cold stares in the hallway, like I'd betrayed some unspoken code by exposing him. I didn't engage with any of it. I stayed quiet, did my work, and waited. Because I knew the truth didn't need defending. It just needed to be seen. And once people saw it, really saw it, they couldn't unsee it. The narrative Mark had built, the image of himself as a brilliant dealmaker, crumbled under the weight of documented facts. Forward after forward of my email spread through the company. People who'd never heard of me suddenly knew exactly who I was. The guy who'd been stolen from. The guy who'd fought back quietly. The guy who'd won without making a scene. 3 days after my email detonated Mark's career, my phone rang. Unknown number, Seattle area code. I answered cautiously. Evan Price speaking. "Evan, it's Kyle Bradford from Apex." I sat up straighter. "Kyle, good to hear from you. How are things?" Confused, honestly, Kyle said. "I got looped into some interesting email threads this week. Want to tell me what's going on over there?" I explained the situation carefully, sticking to facts. When I finished, Kyle was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. I had no idea Mark was taking sole credit. "Every conversation I had with you, every strategy session, every problem we solved together, that was you leading." "Thank you for saying that," I said. "Look, I'm calling because Apex's executive team discussed this situation. We'd rather work with you directly moving forward. You're the one who understood our business. You're the one who built this relationship. Would you be comfortable being our primary contact?" 2 weeks after Kyle's call, the CEO invited me to his office. Not a conference room, his actual office. That had never happened before. He poured 2 cups of coffee himself, another first, and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs by his window. "Evan, I want to apologize," he said, his tone serious. "Mark's behavior was unacceptable. The fact that it went unnoticed for so long reflects poorly on our leadership oversight." "I appreciate that," I said carefully. He continued, "We've completed the investigation. Mark's employment has been terminated. Additionally, we're restructuring our business development division to prevent this from happening again." He paused, watching my reaction. "We'd like you to head that new division. Director of Strategic Partnerships, reporting directly to me. Full leadership authority, team selection, compensation package that reflects your actual value to this company." My heart pounded. "I'm honored." "You earned it," the CEO said simply. "The Apex deal was yours. This promotion is yours. No one's doing you favors." Word spread quickly about Mark's termination. Within days, the industry gossip mill was working overtime. I heard through former colleagues that Mark had been blacklisted across the consulting sector. Apex Systems withdrew their letter of recommendation that they'd written for him, replacing it with one for me instead. Recruiters who'd once pursued him aggressively stopped returning his calls. Companies that had been courting him for leadership positions suddenly went silent. His LinkedIn profile, which had prominently featured the Apex deal, was quietly edited. The professional network he'd spent years building turned cold. Because reputation in our industry spreads fast. When word got out that a director had stolen credit from a junior employee, then got caught and fired, Mark became toxic. No company wanted that liability. No team wanted that leader. The man who'd played chess with other people's careers finally learned he'd been the pawn all along. Not the king he'd imagined himself to be. 4 months later, I moved into my new office. Corner space, windows overlooking downtown, my name on a placard that gleamed under the hallway lights. Not out of ego. Out of peace. I'd built a team of 8 people, all hands selected. We restructured how Stratus approached major partnerships, implementing transparency protocols that made it impossible for another Mark to exist. Client feedback became public internally. Project contributions were documented in real time. Credit was given where credit was earned. The Apex partnership expanded beyond anyone's projections. Kyle and I worked together to integrate their systems with 3 additional Stratus divisions. That single deal I'd nearly lost became a $15 million ongoing relationship. My team's success spoke for itself. Within 6 months, we'd closed 4 more major partnerships. Within a year, our division became the highest revenue generator in company history. And through it all, I never badmouthed Mark publicly. I never celebrated his downfall. Because the victory wasn't about revenge. Looking back now, almost 2 years later, I don't hate Mark Talbot. I actually feel sorry for him. He taught me something invaluable, though not the lesson he intended. When someone steals your work, they steal your moment. But they can't steal your power. Because power isn't something someone gives you or takes away. Power is knowing your worth. Power is having the patience to document truth rather than scream accusations. Power is understanding that justice doesn't require revenge, just clarity. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone who wrongs you is nothing at all except tell the truth and let it burn. That's what my email did. 3 paragraphs and 15 attachments that changed everything overnight. Not because I destroyed Mark, but because I simply showed people who he really was. And who I really was. The system worked, eventually, because I gave it the evidence it needed to work. That's the lesson I carry with me now as I lead my team and mentor young professionals starting their careers. Work hard, document everything, and never be afraid to stand up for yourself when the moment is right. Because sometimes all it takes is one email.